All right, diction flowers is a silly little metaphor I came up with because they would get questions about author's word choice. What does the author's word choice reveal? Plus, if they're given a text and they have no clue where to start in rhetorical analysis, they can always start with diction. Now, why would that be? Because it's got to have words, right? If it doesn't have words, then it's not a text. They can always look at word choice. And in fact, I hope y'all don't find this blasphemous, but I tell my kids that if when they get the rhetorical analysis question, there's a holy trinity of techniques: diction, syntax, and imagery. Because one, it's got to have words, and those words have to, two, make a sentence, and three, if it's a writing worth its salt, it's going to use concrete images. So if you can't figure out anything else the writer's doing, go with word choice, because it's solid for everybody. And like I said, it works for poetry. So then I had to think about a way to get them to figure out how the words were manipulating them. So I came up with this analogy. All right, so let's go back in time to when you were a little kid. Now, guys, y'all may not have done this, but I bet as girls, at some point, you picked flowers for your mom, right? When you go to pick flowers for your mom, how do you do it? You're out in the field. What do you do? Yeah, you don't just grab a massive handful, rip it up, roots and all, and go hand it to her. Maybe a little boy might, but I don't mean to be, but they're like, oh, here's a flower. But most of the time when we're picking flowers, we say, I like that flower, and I like that flower, and I like that flower, and you pick the individual flowers and put them together in a bouquet, right? And then you can smell the bouquet. And it's the same thing that florists do too. They don't just stuff them all down in a vase. They take one flower and then another, and then they arrange them. So I came up with this metaphor for the same thing for diction flowers. When you're given a passage, pick the diction flowers. You pick this word, and then you pick this word, and then you pick the next word, and you put them together, and then you smell the bouquet. If the bouquet smells rotten, what does that tell you about how the writer feels about the character? And I always tell them, start with just easy terms. Is it positive or negative? Well, if it stinks, if it's all rotten words, then obviously the writer has a negative attitude toward the character or whatever it is we're looking at. If the words all smell good, then it must be positive. And then you can go from that to more specifics. And that's what we're going to do. And then I teach them how to turn that into a statement of tone. All right, so we pick the flowers first, and you can have them circle or highlight the words. And then arrange the flowers in a bouquet, and then smell the flowers to determine the author's tone. So what we're going to do, we're going to look at the first one, practice one, and this is exactly how I'm going to do it. Like I said, I start with Gatsby though, but because he's so clear on his word choice when he describes his characters. But I'll read the passage, and I'll tell them, circle the words the writer, in this case, is using to describe August boat riding, or highlight the words the writer is using to describe August boat riding. And then I give them a couple of seconds at the end just to make sure that they're good with it. All right, so let's go. The woman moved along a row of white boxes that bordered the woods beside the pink house. A house so pink it remained a scorched shock on the back of my eyelids after I looked away. She was tall, dressed in white, wearing a pith helmet with veils that floated across her face, settled around her shoulders, and trailed down her back. She looked like an African bride. Lifting the tops off the boxes, she peered inside, swinging a tin bucket of smoke back and forth. Clouds of bees rose up and flew wreaths around her head. Twice she disappeared in the fogged billows, then gradually reemerged like a dream rising up from the bottom of the night. Okay, I'll give you a couple of seconds. Tell me what these words have in common. And well, actually, first step, we list them. What words did you pick? And we go through the words, and we list them. Then I say, okay, what do these words have in common? We make the bouquet out of the words. What do these words have in common? So y'all, give me some ideas.
Dream.
Dreamlike, yes. Okay.
Memorable.
Okay. add some for sake of time. They all have like a wedding or bridal images with the white and the veil and everything. Definitely a little mysterious and ethereal. Y'all with me on that? But at the same time, very beautiful and elegant, and has a sense of goodness and purity. Y'all with me on that? All right. And so, but of course in class, I'm like, okay, what made you think that? I ask them, what made you think that? Where are you getting that from? And usually this takes a little while, the first time I do it. And then after that, I say, okay, here's how you put it together. And honestly, I write it differently every time. I don't just throw up what I've written before. I have written a statement of tone for Tom Buchanan 80,000 times, I think. But to show them my thinking process, I type as I'm thinking, and I say, nope, I need an action verb here. And I go back, and so they get a sense of what I expect from them in a statement of tone. And like I said, this is a baby step, because eventually I'm going to have to teach them how to put it into a bigger context. And I came up with a stupid acronym for that called TEMA, Technique, Example, Meaning, Audience, but that's something else. We won't have time for that. But I start with the baby step, and then we move to building it into paragraphs, and then we write the essay. But for the sake of time, this is what I would expect from them in a statement of tone. Where am I? Kid presents August. Oh, yeah, you can see me typos too. As a view. Well, maybe I shouldn't type all these right now. Beautiful hero with ethereal traits. I'll do at least one more sentence so you can see how I teach them how they should embed their quotes. And what I had come up with before, and even on that, the images of white through the clouds creates a sense of goodness and purity amid Lily's confused world. With veils that float across her face and wreaths around her head, August even looks like an African bride. Kids' admiration and respect for August become clear through her description of a woman at one with nature. And so what I teach them, we start with the diction flowers, we explain what words the writer used, then that where we put them together gives us the tone, and then the last sentence is about, so what? What does that mean? Well, it means we see somebody that's going to be a hero to Lily, who's going to be at one with nature, teach her to be self-confident and secure, that kind of thing. Okay. So let's get back to that. All right, let me see if I can do this now. This is not like my, wait a minute, y'all. Okay. All right, now I've got a whole other list of some more reading strategies there, for close reading strategies that are kind of like that. The signpost strategy comes from Beers and Croat's book, Note and Notice, Reading Nonfiction, and it's really good too. I liked it. It's very helpful reading strategies where it'll teach a student to be able to notice when a writer's making a contrast, so that can name that as a technique. The writer is contrasting here, and here's why the writer's doing it. But this is what's important, I think, about it. Not that it's the diction flowers, but you teach the students a process they can repeat regularly, because that empowers them. Because when we're guiding them, they're like, okay, I can do this with this text. But you give them a new one, they're like, So you give them a process they can repeat. And like I said, when my kids come back for English literature, they're like, what do I do with this poetry? I'm like, pick the diction flowers. Always start with the diction. Pick the diction flowers. So they know that process. We do something similar with syntax. And then the TEMA thing, it's just something they can go to, and it helps them understand the text. And then they can build into bigger things. They begin to take ownership of the active reading process if they have a process. and it helps them develop an idea of their own. They're not waiting on me to tell them what the green light symbolizes. They can figure out a position on it, and it doesn't necessarily even have to be right. It's just that they're thinking about the use of symbolism and having a logical way to get there. And this, Kelly Gallagher points this out over and over again. When you're studying a huge piece like Secret Life of Bees, be careful with your passages. Pick specific passages. Don't go for a whole chapter. And you see that I just pick a paragraph. And start small so they can really delve into it. Close reading takes time. It's not something you can, take a big passage with. So sometimes, like when we're reading a 2 or 3 page essay, we'll end up spending 2 or 3 days on it because we're looking at individual parts. But with what Kelly Gallagher recommends for novels is you read a chapter just to read it, and then you pick out a couple of passages. And let's say it's a particularly rich chapter, he would say give group 1 one passage, group 2 another passage, and so that way you cover the big ideas in that chapter, but nobody is trying to close read pages. And it's also important to model what an effective response is. You've got to show them that this is what a good one looks like. And then, like I said, you can use a gradual release. All right, now I've shown you one, now y'all do it in a group. And you do it in a group a couple times, okay, now you do it individually with me here. And then now you get to do it on your own with a totally cold text. Once you have students reading and annotating for various purposes, you're ready to teach them how to find evidence. If you can get them to interact with the text, and that's such a big deal, then you can teach them how to go pull evidence. And here's an example of what I would do. And I've got a whole list of those too. I might require them to defend a literary theory. And I would give them a literary theory on a particular passage, like the passage is back. Now, we're still doing diction flowers on this in class, but I thought this passage would work well for this too. But they've accomplished diction flowers. They know how to do some annotation strategies. So then I say, okay, I'm going to give you a literary theory on this from this book. Some people say that the Black Mary statue is a symbol of defiance. And of course, I want them to teach them what defiance means. And then some people say that the Black Mary statue represents a light for others to follow in terms of knowledge and inspiration. And then I give them this passage. And I say, okay, y'all find the evidence that this is true. And y'all find the evidence that that's true. So what I do when I start teaching them to quote is I start with the big idea first. I give them the answers and then ask them to find the evidence for it. Just so they get acquainted with the idea of, we can flip it later. We can look at the evidence then draw conclusions if they understand what kind of conclusion they're supposed to draw. So I give them the conclusion first, now you go find the evidence for it, and then we'll flip later. And the examples I give you later on, they go in order of simplicity. The first one is for the very beginning, and you're just asking them to find, like if I were doing Gatsby, I would say, find evidence that Tom is a jerk. And, and then it goes to a little more complex things. And I'm going to give you a quick example of what I do with another short story I love when I do my Gothic unit. I like teaching the short story, Where Are You Going, Where Have You Been by Joyce Carol Oates. I don't know if y'all know that story. It's a creepy guy named Arnold Friend who shows up to kidnap a girl at her house. But I give them, and they're fascinated with it. And they think it's very much just teenagers. And I ask them, okay, who is Arnold Friend really? Who is Arnold Friend? And almost always they can't get it. And so I give them a few clues. But finally what I'll do is say, okay, what about this? Could Arnold Friend really be Satan? And they're like, what? And I find the evidence for it. Argue for it. Tell me if he's Satan or not. And then when they go back, it's so scandalous to think that this is Satan coming to possess her soul. They tear up that short story. And they're like, where'd you get that he was Satan? And then they find it. And then they see how the writer has embedded it so carefully